When you're ready.
Ready?
Yep.
Coronavirus is an international, awful health phenomenon. We saw protests right across the world yesterday in solidarity with George Floyd's family in America, and of course here in Australia, highlighting the issue of Aboriginal deaths in custody and the incarceration rates of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. There were protests in England, France, Japan, South Korea, and in all capital cities and many regional centres here in Australia. Politicians, leaders of business, leaders of sports organisations, and many people, next door neighbours, are listening to the visceral cry of people who are speaking out against inequality and poor treatment. I understand that in Western Australia, the incarceration rates are the second highest of any state and territory in Australia. They're up around 53, 54%, and in some locations, almost 100%. There have been 2 terrible deaths in custody, perhaps more in Western Australia in the last little while. One in Port Hedland, and also, of course, one in the north of the state. Matthias Cormann should know better than to describe these protests yesterday, this cry from the heart of many thousands of people across the world and in Australia, as self-indulgent and reckless. It struck me, listening to people at the protest, that they were very conscious of what the health risks are. And we even saw police officers in Queensland handing out face masks. We saw attempts at social distancing. And yes, of course, we're all concerned about the legality and also the health issues of the many protests. But people made a conscious decision that what we are seeing now in Australia and across the world is something we would do well to listen to. Thank you.
Nor Hader here from the ABC. How did you personally feel hearing Matthias Cormann describe these protesters as selfish and self-indulgent?
I'm not going to get into a to and fro between myself and Matthias Cormann, except to say that it would be helpful, I think, for Mr. Cormann to look at the record and look at what the reality is in the state that he represents. I spoke publicly, as did many others in the Labor Party and across the board, about people being clear about what the health issues were and what the legal issues were with the protest yesterday. But I also understand the anguish, the frustration, and the anger that people are experiencing. And I think many people saw the issue of deaths in custody as something that is important to speak out about now in Australia. It is the responsibility of elected leaders and people with a voice in the community to respond to what's going on around the world. It is not something that we can ignore. And Mr. Cormann would do himself a favour if he would also listen to those cries.
Linda Pavler here from SBS. Do you think Mr. Cormann's comments are tone deaf, as Richard Marles has said, and does he need to apologise?
Mr. Cormann's comments this morning, as Richard Marles has said on Insiders this morning, were tone deaf, and I think politically expedient, quite frankly. Mr. Cormann, I understand, is making some comments this afternoon, and I look forward to hearing what those comments are. I hope that he understands, as does his party, that there is a real issue in this country about the equality and about the social justice outcomes for First Australians.
Linda Burney, Tim Lester from 7 News. Are you suggesting that this issue in particular warranted protests yesterday, or are you suggesting that people generally who have a want to protest should be able to, in spite of the limits that coronavirus has imposed?
Well, when you had a look at what happened here in Sydney yesterday, the Supreme Court on Friday night deemed the gatherings illegal, and I understand that was overturned. What I am saying is that people have to consider very seriously, really seriously, what the issues are in terms of coronavirus. That goes without saying. But what I am also saying is that I understand the frustration and the reason that tens of thousands of Australians, both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal, turned out to say that enough is enough yesterday. And I particularly look at the anguish of the Dungay family, David Dungay's mother, sister and brother. I spoke with grace, with generosity and with care about what they have experienced since the death 5 years ago of Mr. Dungay.
Ms. Burney, Jonathan Kersley from 9 News, thank you very much for your time. Irrespective of the issue, in your belief, should people be protesting at this time at all?
I think what we have seen across the world is instructive. This is the 12th day of protest in America, and there has been a chord struck about, I believe, inequality in that country. But my point is this, is that people made individual decisions. They made individual decisions understanding what the legal and the health risks were. They took the action that they did, and it is important that people understand why people took those actions and the level of anger and frustration, particularly that I think young people are feeling.
Linda Burney, Tim Lester again from 7. Given you support the action taken yesterday, would you support any follow-up protests in the near future?
Tim, that's not for me to say. It's not for me to say whether I support something or I don't support something. What I am simply saying is that the level of frustration, the fact that there were tens of thousands of people yesterday that felt that they need to send a message of solidarity to the Floyd family in America and highlight the issue of Aboriginal deaths in custody in Australia was instructive.
Jonathan Kersley again from 9 News. In that case, then, would you support protests on any other issue other than the George Floyd protest? If there were protests on other matters, on, say, for example, conspiracy theorist protests or other types of issues, would you support those protests going ahead and those people having the right to protest?
I'm not sure that that's a relevant question right now. The issue is that the protests yesterday were endorsed by some state and territory governments. The courts made decisions. People took individual actions, both as individuals and I actually know as families. This is a time that is particularly fraught because of the virus. And because of people's desire to take action about this particular issue. And it seems to me that people are very focused on solidarity with the Floyd family in America and in this country, highlighting the fact that we do have, since the Royal Commission in 1991, over 430 deaths in custody. It seems to me that yesterday's protests were stately, they were well organised, and from all reports, without a lot of incident, and that's really, really important.
Linda, it's Tegan George from Channel 10. Matthias Cormann keeps using the reasoning that people can't go to loved ones' funerals, and watching yesterday's protests must have been incredibly difficult for them. What do you think about that reasoning being used in this debate?
Matthias Cormann this morning used reckless and self-indulgent. I don't think people were either of those things. Obviously he has a view and he has a right to that view. But like Richard Marles said, it was tone deaf, and I also think politically expedient.
Can you understand, though, people feeling hurt who have been unable to go to funerals or unable to attend, family weddings, feeling hurt seeing these mass gatherings?
I can understand that people would have very mixed views, particularly if they'd lost a loved one or were not able to attend a wedding. I was in the same situation about two very significant elders dying in New South Wales, and normally their funerals would be very large and very open. Of course they weren't. But I think Matthias Cormann is doing a fair bit of backpedaling, and he needs to understand that this is a very real issue for people, and people have strong views about it, and part of the job of any politician is to understand what your constituents are saying. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda.